for a moment consider some of the names that we use to describe God. Adon Olam, the master of the world. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Rofei Cholim, the healer of the sick. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. HaRachman, the Merciful One. These are just to name a few of hundreds. When we consider these names, perhaps it comes as a bit of a surprise when we read this verse from Parshat Noach. And I, behold, I am bringing the flood water upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which there is the spirit of life from beneath the heavens. All that is upon the earth will perish. The God that we see this week in Parshat Noach is a very different God from the one that we see 5 chapters earlier, who creates the world and love and human beings in his image. Now we read on in horror as we witness our Father, our King, commit mass human genocide against every living being. As much as we want God to be a loving and merciful protector of all peoples, the truth is that in this Torah portion, we see a very violent deity. One that on more than one occasion has to be talked out of killing entire nations and entire towns. Our God commanded the Israelites who were wandering in the desert to kill every living Amalekite when conquering the land of Israel. Now, this is not a symbolic gesture of something that we're supposed to read through the lines. The book of Samuel implies that it required actual fulfillment, as it is written, "Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not. Slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox, sheep, camel, and ass." So how do we cope with the violence in our Torah? If we are truly the people of the book, what do we do when we realize that the book is terribly bloody and God acts in ways that we would not always consider moral? At what point can we look at the Torah and say that perhaps I do not agree with God's action? In Parshat Noach, we experience an intensely powerful God. In fact, the only reason that Noah and his family were selected to repopulate the earth is because Noah and his 3 sons were men who loved and, more importantly, feared God. The fear of God was one of the 2 simple criteria for not being blotted out from the earth by way of great flood. For the time being, let's set aside the troublesome nature of God killing the entire world, and let's focus on some of the outcomes. We always talk about the flood being 40 days and 40 nights. There's songs about this. However, that is just the amount of time that the rain fell. At this point in our portion, Noah and his family have been living in the ark for 7 months. 7 months, that sounds familiar. The waters have finally resided, and they are about to walk onto the land as the only living beings in the world. Soon after the departure from the ark, God and Noah make a covenant. God promised that he would never again curse the earth because of man, and God assures us that the laws of nature, including the seasons and the heat and the cold and the daytime and the nighttime, would never again fail altogether, as they had during the time of the flood. Noah was given the Noahide laws, the 7 fundamental ethical laws, including the injunction against murder and theft, adultery and incest, worshiping idols, blasphemy, extreme cruelty against animals, and settling disputes in a court of law rather than by force. This covenant is a contract. Both sides are required to uphold their end, or the other party is no longer responsible for theirs. In this way, by accepting this covenant, humanity has agreed to a rather disturbing power dynamic. God promises that if you do all of these things, then I will not kill you. Now, I don't have a law degree, but I'm quite sure that this type of covenant, this contract, would not hold up in a court of law. The duress of saying, do this and I will let you live, does not give us much of a choice. It does, on the other hand, make us fear God, which, according to this week's Torah portion, is a very positive relationship to have with God. However, we cannot build our relationship with God based off of any one particular story, or based off of the notion that God will always act in a violent fury. As we know, God has many facets, similar to us being, as we learned that we were made B'Tselem Elohim, that we are not so simple of beings to claim to be all good or all bad. However, a major question we must ask: does God still destroy? Do we live in a world in which God plays an active role in the saving and the destruction of life? A question truly of our time, and a question that we can simply never answer. We can search our whole lives, but we will have searched in vain. Rather, it is more important to ask the question, which would I prefer? An active God or a passive God? We cannot know or change God's true nature. However, by articulating the way in which we wish that God were, by articulating our conceptions of God, we strengthen our relationship. It might not always be a positive shift, but any time a relationship with God is transformed, a deeper connection is created. In this week's Parsha, Noah does not ask any questions. He takes God at face value. He does not argue to save the world, nor does he question God's motives. I'm going to suggest that this is not the kind of relationship that we must seek to have with God ourselves. We do not have the luxury of being able to speak with or witness God's awesome power. Therefore, in order to strengthen our relationship with an all-powerful God, we must constantly ask questions. We must continuously try to define our relationship with God. We must seek to understand not God's actions, but our responses to those actions. So this Shabbat, may we all find a deeper connection to ourselves and our attempt to understand our God. Shabbat Shalom.